So first of all, let me thank the organizers for having involved me in this incredibly interesting initiative, and also I'm very grateful for not having put Dorota in my stint because I had no idea on how to pronounce her name. And okay, we can follow more or less the order which is on the program, so I ask Giorgio to deliver his speech.
Yeah, I prepared a small presentation just because I think I know why I've been invited, and if I think it wouldn't be right if I didn't speak about what we're doing in the UK. So if you can maybe, yeah. So I wanted to be very quick, and it would have been easier with a set of slides rather than just me talking through this. So what is that? So clearly the title of this session is Where Do We Go From Here? Perspectives for Action. So I wanted to quickly introduce you to the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center, which is a UKRI-funded project. Now it's in its second phase in the UK. In its first phase, it was part of the industrial strategy, funded through the Arts and Humanities Research Council. And it was a great success, to the point that the HRC decided to fund for another phase and increase the funding up to £11 million. And we leverage the funds available are going beyond the 11 original millions. Now, in the second phase of the PAC, clearly it's not May 2023, so apologies for that, but it's the host of the PAC is Newcastle University, my institution, together with the Royal Society of Arts. Now, the UK creative industries are very well defined. I think that's one of the key distinctive features of the UK. Many other industrial countries have very well-defined creative industries. Globally, the creative industries are increasing at a very fast-growing pace, whether you measure this through GVA, employment, or international trade. And you can see how all countries around the globe are developing industrial strategies that are specifically targeting the creative industries. The UK is quite advanced in this respect, both in terms of measurement, definition of the sectors, and also policies, as I said previously. So in 2018, there was already a sector deal, and we are waiting for a sector vision to be published, hopefully this month or even this week. Now, what is the vision for the PAC? The PAC addresses industry and government's current priorities for the creative industries, including those set out in strategy documents such as the sector vision that is going to come out soon, while at the same time advancing research into the longer-term challenges and opportunities facing the sector. So how do we do this? 3 ways. We produce our own research and make it available in a range of accessible formats. We are a platform for policy-relevant research that is undertaken by others. And maybe most interesting for this session, engaging policymakers through embedding researchers and our policy unit in their planning, design, and delivery cycles, which is, I think, quite critical in terms of influencing policy. Now, what we have proposed for this second phase of the PAC for the next 5 years is a twin-hub model where you have a research-intensive institution like Newcastle University and an historical association like the RSA joining their forces together. And in this model, we have on one side, you can see the research unit. We are forming at Newcastle University, and we have a national research consortium made of 4 partners that I'm going to discuss in the next slides. Plus, we want to create a global network of researchers. And all this is joined up with the with the policy side, where in the new PAC, beyond the national piece, which is still going to be hosted in London by the RSA, we have also the desire to understand a bit better what is the local policy cycle and how we can embed evidence into policymaking at the local level through the Northern Hub, and with aspiration of creating a Northern creative corridor that spans from east to west in England. As an exemplary for similar exercises also across other parts of the UK, because as you probably will know, the creative industries are very heavily concentrated in the south of the UK. Now, we're going to produce, through the research consortium made of Sussex, Work Advance, Newcastle University and Sheffield, regular reports on 4 areas that we thought lacked regular reporting. These are R&D, innovation and clusters, creative education, skills and talent, internationalization, and the arts, cultural, and the heritage sectors. But we're going to continue working in other areas like intellectual property, business models, and access to finance, public service broadcasting, and other cross-cutting themes. And we see things like EDI, equality, diversity, and inclusion, and sustainability as cross-cutting issues. And we are going to continue with our ongoing embedded knowledge exchange model, which is embedding researchers into this policy-producing cycle. Now, the other feature of PEC2 is this global network of researchers. So beyond the network, we're going to make a call for a global network. Our ambition is to become the global network of choice for researchers working on creative industries and policymaking in the creative industries. And in order to achieve this, we have already partnered from the outset with a number of organizations. I'm sure we're going to expand the set of partners as we move forward. Nationally, across all the devolved nations of the UK, where policies are defined also differently, even in areas like education, for example. But also international, we have a Global Creative Economy Council that refreshes our initial international council funded by the British Council. We are partnering with the ITKIC, Creativity, and then also with the OECD. Okay, that's it. So if you want to know more, you can visit our website or ask for information from Hassan and myself. Now, I have just one slide of things that I would like to say, where to go to. And these are reflections based on my experience working on the creative industries and policy influence over the last few years, but also in terms of the discussions that have happened today. So one first reflection is about making the case for more art and culture. And I think one of the risks of doing this is to become partisans. And the risk of becoming partisans is that then you're going to have arts and culture hostage of political discourse, so the cultural wars. And then if you are living a bipartisan political system, you are really at risk of being at the whim of the policymaker of the turn. And that's very risky. So how do you avoid that? I think the arts and cultural world should ask policymakers for evidence-based policy. It should be really a request by the sector and the researchers, holding the policymakers accountable for their decisions. And of course, the researchers are there to produce this evidence, but there needs to be a demand by the policymakers. If there isn't such a demand, then it's going to be really difficult. So if we ask policymakers for more funds without explaining where we want these funds to go and why, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to hold this discourse. The second point, which is really coming out of me listening to all the beautiful conversations in this 2 days, is that we need to try and go beyond the more arts and culture slogan into what kind of arts and culture do we want? At the end of the day, if we think about it, arts and culture and expressions of arts and culture are media of communication. We all understand the importance of media of communication and the effects they have on people. Why should it be different for arts and culture expressions? But it's a matter of understanding good culture and good art and how this can influence the health and well-being of people. So we need to test interventions, like probably happens very often in the medical and scientific world, where we need to understand what kind of interventions we actually need. I want to know whether if playing the guitar is good for me, I want to know how many hours I need to play the guitar and what music I need to play. So we need evidence that allows to understand that. And also, now, thanks to the speech that Luigi gave yesterday, 30 years ago, when I finished my high school, I did an essay on otium versus negotium, okay? And it was a comparison between Virgilius and Theocritus. It's just all gone by. I mean, I don't even know where it is. But I think I remember I must have said something like the otium was active. Otium was not for the Romans and the Greek. Now, I think there is a critical issue here. If we treat otium and negotium as a dichotomy, I think there is a risk. And the risk is that when we start entering the discussion about education, about innovation, about productivity, and I've heard a lot of talks in these 2 days about, for example, the role of culture in the workplace, or the role of arts and creativity in education. If we create a separation, I think that is is not necessarily productive in terms of what we want to achieve. Because in a way, we need to blend the two. And in a world where ideas are critical, the otium is instrumental to have good negotium to generate new ideas. And that means that there cannot be separation between creatives and non-creatives. And this separation is totally, I think, fictitious. And it is definitely fictitious in the workplace, in high productive firms, in innovative firms. And it makes the case for putting in the same workplace. So it's not about, I suppose, my workforce to culture, and then suddenly my non-creative workforce will be more productive. I spend days doing repetitive tasks, and then I rest in the evening so that I can do another repetitive day of repetitive tasks next day. It's about how my works can become more creative and generate better ideas, and that goes through better consumption of culture. Now, in terms of practical next steps, we definitely need a global research agenda. I think the starting point for this would be, for me, having common standards, their language to start with. I mean, people talk about the same things using very different concepts. We can argue for ages about what we really mean, methods that we use, but also we need more and better data. And definitely we need a global interdisciplinary network of researchers. We need more meetings like this one. They have to be regular. And we need to bring in the funders into this discourse. I think that's critical because the incentives are very often there. I know that in the REF, for example, the Research Excellence Framework in the UK, what happens is that because of the role of impact in research evaluation, we researchers are very strongly incentivized to bring policymakers and this industry into our research. And that's, I think, the final point I wanted to make about bringing policymakers in the room. I think it would be great if we had more evidence and data-educated policymakers. And in order to do this, we need to bring them into our discussions and understand what their needs are and how we can make our research meaningful for them. How can they help us shape our research questions, and how we can then influence their actions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Giorgio was talking about evidence-based policy, and I guess Annalisa will help us understand how to assess the impact of cultural policies, I guess.
I hope. Thanks a lot. I will try to be very short, of course, but I must start with sort of huge topic with I think I will only mention, because I think that yesterday and today we often have switched between different meanings of the concept of culture. And I just remind you that back in the 1950s, the two anthropologists who tried to count how many definitions were there around, they stopped at 164 then. So I think that, for instance, in my case, it's honest to say that when I refer to culture, I refer to cultural sectors of activities and their services and products and the relative use of time, money, and resources that people invest in them. So it's a very narrow idea, but it is, for me, it's very necessary, because if you invite in the room the huge and multidimensional notion of culture as in cultural anthropology, well, we must equip ourselves with a lot of additional instruments. Now, concerning some reflection that I will propose to you in a sort of double capacity. One is the capacity of research at the National Statistical Institute. Maybe you don't know, but in the last 4 years, the Istat has invested in a line of, let's say, blue sky research on this topic, which is absolutely strange. I'm very happy of this. I have the responsibility of coordinating that activity. It is very promising, also taking into account that they are not investing any additional resources. But we do have an interesting, let's say, bounty of data that can be used. But that's just to give you an element of context. The other one is that I'm very happy to be included as a founding members with distinguished persons here in the Cultural Welfare Center, which is a recent created association promoted by Ekaterina and including Pier Luigi and Vittorio and a lot of persons who are active in this field and in the last 24, 30 years at least, and that as a more a role in the field of advocacy and creating bridges and opportunities. Now, in this double capacity, I would propose to you 3 points, only 3 points, but they are split into minor points, so I will, I will be short, but not so short. The first one is research. And I think one of the most important things that we are expected to do is to going on in monitoring the field. How many projects are there? Many of them are self-defined culture and arts for health and well-being, and probably they are a bit stretched because they deal with social inclusion. They are quite borderline. However, there is an enormous quantity. Our colleagues at Culture Action Europe have counted over 800 only in the last 3 years of activity. It is a sort of voluntary registration. So I think the fact that we continue to monitor the activity in the field is absolutely relevant. On the other hand, I think we should also profit and try of profiting and also monitoring the opportunities, because we are in an unprecedented occasion. I think also thanks to the work of Pier Luigi, because at the level of the European community there are a lot of opportunities. This, the recent call in Horizon, for instance, offer important opportunities, and I think it is necessary. Of course, we are working now in a sort of very, very fragmented manner, but I think we should try to converge as much as possible. Another point is that I think we should indeed invest in guided pilot projects. Motherhood has been mentioned already, and there are a few that are worth investing in. We know that there are some areas where the relationship works very well, and I can mention Alzheimer's, I can mention Parkinson's diseases. There are areas where we are quite mature, and we should insist to have pilot projects that could produce the information that we need. Then there is something that I'm very grateful to Callum Smith, who is a colleague of Niels, for bringing about. That is the idea of working about the active principle in cultural and artistic projects for culture and well-being. We should try to isolate what works. And this is because we should avoid as much as possible a very superficial and generic idea that culture is good for you. Culture may be good for you, but in some cases, I'm convinced that it is good for you, but in some cases there is a specific intervention that can address a specific subject and a specific need. And I think that we should concentrate the attention in that direction. So be very selective in that way. And on the same line, I think we should really produce some sort of, I don't know, a sort of inventory of best matches, what works best for whom and for what. And I also think that, you know, that there is a very neglected area at the level of cultural statistics, which is not the best prosperous kind of statistics, at least in Europe. You know that we have no idea of what cultural participation is, because there is no investigation, there is no survey. There are a lot of reasons. Many of them are political, many of them are institutional, but we do not know how is the situation currently. And we have very old and rusty and conventional definitions, because we are still asking people in our national instances if they go to the cinema, while the question should rather be if they have watched films in whatever support they and how do they feel, and if they like them, and what remains. So a lot of things that I think should be the object of an effort of knowledge and investigation. And this, with this, research is served. Now, second point is training and education. We have two important levels. One is, of course, creating bridges at the level of the medical faculties and the social service faculties and all the areas of encounter and multidisciplinary areas that are being created. There we need an important investment. I think we already have some results from some Erasmus Plus projects that have produced something, but it's again fragmented. There is no a single stream of profiting of the gains of all this. And this is at the level, let's say, of the scientific, medical, and social education. On the other hand, I think we should help and assist the cultural sectors to develop capacities and to acquire hard skills in this field, because we have a lot of tests and experiences going on. Many of them are often made out of goodwill, but lack the necessary robustness. And in this case, especially when they mobilize the expectation of people in need, and when we enter, for instance, the field of mental health, I think we should be very careful, and I think we should provide the sector with appropriate instruments. So this is another element. And finally, the third element that I propose to you is advocacy. This is very hard because I go straight. I think we need an 18th goal in the 2030 agenda. I know, we all know the reasons why there is no goal about culture. Many years have passed. I think the question is still open and should again be dealt with. We need an indication. We need something that recognizes a basic right to a minimum amount of cultural access and practice and enjoyment. Use the verb that you prefer. Because the second point, which is apparently an easy task, is that we should work together to establish a sort of minimum level of cultural services to help people to attain this goal. I think we need a leap, an idea that culture, in this sense, in this small sense, reduced sense, related to access to service, experiences, products, places that enrich people, represents a form of general interest, like health, like security, like safety, like clean water, like roads. So, it's enough.
Thank you so much. Alessandra, it's your floor.
Thank you. Very good afternoon to all. I'm very happy to be here. Let me bring you the greetings from Costanza Miliani, Director of the Institute of Heritage Science of the National Research Council of Italy. Let me briefly introduce the institute. Our institute, with over 180 researchers, technicians, and technologists from various disciplines, is committed to innovation in the understanding, conservation, and enhancement of cultural heritage through an interdisciplinary research approach involving humanities, technological applications, and experimental sciences. It leads several European projects, coordinates the Italian nodes of the European research infrastructure for heritage science, and also participates to EAT Culture and Creativity. And in this occasion, I would catch this opportunity to present some opportunities for action for the global platform that we are celebrating here in these 2 days, from an ongoing analysis that the Institute is carrying out within EAT Culture and Creativity that is aimed to map the representation of culture and creative industries in research and innovation strategies for smart specialization, RIS3. This is an ongoing analysis, but I hope that this preliminary evidence that we have could be interesting for identifying the opportunities for interdisciplinary research. The research is carried out within the action program 10 on policy optimizer led by Pier Luigi. So, briefly, very briefly, this is a very well-known concept, leading innovation instrument of cohesion policy, RIS3, aimed to boost innovation-led regional development through a place-based approach, building on available resources that locally, the competitive strengths, and also the local socioeconomic challenges, through a decision-making process that aims to focus investments on a well-defined set of priority areas in terms of economic areas, scientific fields, and technological applications. These priorities are identified through stakeholder engagement into an entrepreneurial discovery process, adopting a broad view of innovation that encompasses both technological as well as not technological innovation. The current debate on RIS3 particularly emphasizes their strategic role to support the achievement of sustainable development goals, and so the shift from RIS3 to S4, methodological guidance has been provided to better incorporate sustainability challenge into the definition of the updated priorities, and several regions have started to experiment with this challenge-led entrepreneurial discovery process. Starting from the background of smart sustainable specialization strategies, the aim, the objective of our analysis is to identify opportunities and synergies between EAT Culture and Creativity and RIS3. This is a very simple overview of the framework for mapping these linkages. Basically, it is aimed at identifying which territories prioritize cultural and creative sectors and industries in their strategies, which are the relevant priority areas, the sectors involved, and establish linkages with the strategic agenda of EAT Culture and Creativity, so in relation to its transition areas, high impact areas, and also to the strategic topic groups that are built within the community. In this occasion, I will just show some initial findings from the landscape analysis that we are conducting, and I am happy to present some more encouraging evidence in terms of number of territories prioritizing cultural and creative sectors and industries in the current programming period. Of course, this is just a preliminary findings, and more or less it is over 80% of the sample that we analyzed, but is an encouraging number number, it is also derived from the fact that we adopt a broad definition of creative and cultural sectors and industries beyond the core cultural and heritage sectors. Interestingly, in our analysis, we found that territories prioritizing CCI have often more than one priorities. This means that some areas have both priorities devoted to the whole system or to a specific sector of cultural and creative industry, like, for example, audiovisual, and also link cultural and creative sectors and industry through challenge related priority, like, for example, circular economy or health. And the profile of our sample in this case is quite varied. So we have regions, including in terms of innovation performance, we have regions and countries that score as innovation leaders as well as emerging innovators. Now, to go more into the opportunities, looking more in detail of some of the topics that are addressed within the priority areas and trying to link these topics to EAT, culture and creativity transition areas, we see that there are plenty of opportunities to benefit from interdisciplinary people-centered research intertwining behavioral, psychological, and biophysical research on culture that are related to the challenge of the triple transition, green, digital, and social. Clearly, the distinction is not so clear, no? So it's a bit blurred in the sense that some topics are, of course, addressed in a more comprehensive way. But these first insights give you the idea of how this kind of research can be important to support innovation in relation to these topics. Just to make a few examples, one of the most relevant areas is sustainable tourism. In many regions, cultural and creative industries are linked to tourism. In some cases, they are embedded into priorities devoted to tourism. In other cases, tourism and cultural and creative sectors are blended together. Sustainable tourism is an important area of action, and of course, the possibility to promote sustainable concepts and destinations is also linked to the possibility to address behavior change of tourists, and in particular to design, implement, and measure intervention based on culture that are effective in changing the behavior of tourists, not only during their experience at destination, so as tourists, but more importantly also as individuals in their daily lives in terms of, for example, climate-friendly behaviors. Another important area that is particularly supported by this kind of interdisciplinary research is the one related to the application of extended technologies to cultural heritage. Besides, this is one of the important areas of research of our institute, which has a digital heritage innovation lab that is devoted to research on how the access and enjoyment of heritage can be improved through new technologies. In this specific case, the interdisciplinary approach that we are seeing in these days is particularly relevant, for example, in better understanding how the emotional engagement of users and visitors during this heritage immersive or hybrid experiences is relevant to change their behavior. Positive but also negative emotions can be particularly important in also, for example, influencing not only the enjoyment of the heritage, but also the development, the trigger of a caring attitude towards the protection of cultural heritage. And finally, to give just another example, one important focus of priorities is focused on inclusion. This was mentioned yesterday also by Daniela Sani. So the diversity, inclusivity, and accessibility is an increasingly important areas. And in these strategies, there is attention also, for example, to how inclusive design can be deployed to support more inclusive services. And this is, of course, another important areas for interdisciplinary research. So to conclude, overall, the current scenario, the current landscape analysis looks to be promising in terms of the benefits that interdisciplinary research can have in boosting innovation in cultural and creative industries to address the triple transition challenges. Thank you.
Okay. Now, I guess, Katherine, you have to be patient because I know that there is Ekaterina. Thank you so much for participating, and I leave you the floor. So, okay, I see you. Hi.
Fantastic. Yeah, very good. Well, thank you so much, and great couple of days. And I'm so it's such a pity that I'm not there with you in person. And congratulations to Pier Luigi for your convening power here. Well, I don't think I'll deliver this prepared speech that I have, but I would rather maybe share with you my personal reflection on the evolution of the attitude of policymakers other than culture, towards culture. I'll be echoing some of the things that Annalisa Cicerchia was saying and some other colleagues on the panel. Well, you know, I work at the OECD, and we do not work so much with ministries of culture. We work with others. We work with ministries of employment, regional development, the economy, etc. And in fact, we are seeing a bit of a shift, quite a major shift, in fact, over the past maybe 6-7 years in the perception of these policymakers of the importance of culture as an economic sector, okay? And then also growing interest in the social impact of culture and appetite today to understand how culture be part of the answer to the global challenges, be it health and well-being, be it climate change or other. So I think there is really a big window of opportunity that we have now, and the role of this new center can be major if we manage to translate the evidence that you produce into policy solutions, into, well, what works, as Annalisa just put it. So what we were seeing, and well, I guess it's obvious for you as well, when culture policymakers speak to the culture sector, they sort of preach to the converted. But for quite a number of years, they were not able to catch the eye of other policy fields, other policymakers. So we think that culture can help address climate change. But do policymakers that are responsible for climate change agenda know about this? Probably not. So to catch the eye of these policymakers beyond culture, of course, it was good to start with demonstrating the economic impact of the sector, well, in the number of jobs, GVA, etc. And there was a gradual recognition of the economic impact of culture over the past few years. So Italy held a G7 culture ministerial in 2017. We at the OECD, we started to focus in a consistent manner on culture as an economic sector from 2018, and we published a number of reports, well, about the jobs in the sector, GVA, number of firms, the demand for cultural goods and services as part of household spending, exports, venture capital investment, etc. Saudi Arabia put culture on the G20 table in 2020. Italy did it like in a more formal way. Over 100 regions across Europe now include culture in their innovation and smart specialization strategy, etc. So I think there is a more or less good recognition of the economic importance of the sector across OECD G20, more or less. What happened next is that these policymakers, other than culture, discovered that the non-economic impact of culture. Of course, the scoping report by the World Health Organization was quite a game changer back then. Then the new European agenda for culture in 2018 was also very important, something that Pier Luigi also was working on. But then, of course, COVID happened, and for many policymakers, it was quite a revelation to see not only the economic importance and how the sectors suffered throughout COVID because of their structural and internal fragilities, but also how important culture is for mental health and well-being, and museums by prescription are not anymore regarded as a joke by many policymakers. And so something that was quite evident for the sector, for the health professionals, for academics, became more and more recognized in the mainstream policy making. So there is quite an appetite. So I think there was quite a change in the minds of many policymakers, and there is now this appetite to know, so okay, I do believe that this can work, but maybe show me still some evidence, but also give me practical solutions. And I'm thinking if the person is the head of a local employment office, local employment service office, and they have to provide a new program for long-term unemployed, what's the role of culture? How concretely they can deal with this? Or think about a school with high dropout rates. Okay, so what are the answers that work? How you include? What kind of cultural interventions do you want to include? What works there? There are no one size fits all, etc. But there are still ingredients that are important for success. And of course we know, and there were a lot of talk about connecting the dots and between different disciplines, and that the answer is the future lies in this interdisciplinary approach. And of course, this new center has the ambition to focus on this. But you know that this can be difficult, and it's as difficult for the policy world to design interventions that are bringing different policy fields together, to align budgets, to commonly agreed priorities, to align monitoring frameworks, etc. So for me, this is one of the maybe biggest steps that we need to make, and hopefully this new center will help this, and also in the OECD we hope to continue to serve this agenda as well. So it was very beautiful to hear this song earlier today, Per fare un tavolo che ci vuole un fiore. So maybe what we need now is also recipes for what works, to cook dishes to put on the table. So this was my attempt to connect with what was said earlier today. Thank you.
Ekaterina, thank you very much. And now, Katherine, it's up to you.
All right. Yes, I've really enjoyed my time here the past couple of days and learning from all of you. And so I've just kind of prepared some general reflections on based what I've kind of observed, and particularly from a more research-oriented perspective, since I'm a psychologist by training, and very interested in developing the knowledge base so that we can then take it to the implementation stage and create policies that are evidence-informed for the ways in which arts and cultural engagement can improve health and well-being. And so something that I really appreciated kind of hearing from a lot of folks during this workshop was there isn't the one-size-fits-all kind of culture. There's different ways in which we engage in culture that will better serve different outcomes, that will better serve different populations and different individuals. And something that I think is quite important as we consider thinking about the nuances of how we engage with the arts and culture is what exactly the nature of the engagement is. So what are the active ingredients about what we're doing during cultural engagement that help us to feel more socially connected to one another, to feel greater quality of life and greater flourishing? And so thinking about the kind of mechanism, so why is it that we see these benefits when people engage with cultural institutions, when they have arts in their day-to-day lives? What is it about how they're engaging that is driving these effects? And so I think there's been work discussed here that has started to get at this question and propose different mechanisms or different pathways of what's driving some of these effects. And I think given the state of the field has established that there are these connections between cultural engagement and well-being, we need to start interrogating the why. So why is it that we see these effects, and how can we optimize them? And identifying both the potential practices that seem to be particularly effective, as well as the processes that underlie these practices that can help us to conduct more robust research, but also gain a greater understanding of why these things are happening, just as we do in other fields. And kind of developing and further kind of refining, once we understand some of these underlying processes, I think will be very well empowered to create very effective and robust interventions and programs, such as the pre-tax has a beautiful, elaborate, detailed protocol that is working well for a lot of people. And so as we get to understand more of what's going on when we're doing these processes, we can develop other programs that are tailored to serve particular outcomes as we understand those underlying processes. We can target what we're designing to serve a particular need or a particular problem or a particular opportunity that we're seeing in the world. And these can be these large-scale, robust interventions that take a large amount of resources or training or time or serve folks in the long term, but we can also think about smaller micro-interventions that help just prepare people for going to an art museum. How can we get more out of that visit? In addition to cultivating these skills like resilience, thinking of what kind of John was presenting yesterday around the work in Kenya, kind of really building up these resources for individuals. But can we just tweak how people approach their engagement with the arts and their mindsets in a way that helps them to continue to engage in arts and culture, since that's a very important component. And one of the things we know is if people enjoy this engagement and get kind of satisfaction, derive positive emotions from these forms of engagement, they're more likely to continue in the future. So can we both make it a positive experience and simultaneously build upon some of those other resources or kind of ameliorate some of those negative components or negative states people may be experiencing. And as we're thinking about making these interventions and thinking about how we can tweak people's arts and cultural engagement, I think something that I've heard here and I've been very excited to hear from all of you is the definite need to integrate this work with people working in the arts and culture sector and professionals in these spaces, because for example, I do a lot of work with art museums, and I know a lot about the psychology of art and aesthetics, and they know a lot more about how to really facilitate an artistic experience with their visitors and with their audiences, and bring really unique perspectives and training to this space for us to co-create these interventions and these experiences based both in the scientific evidence, but also in the norms and practices of these cultural institutions. Because if we want there to be kind of uptake of some of these programs or interventions, we have to make something that's sustainable for these sectors and for these institutions, and that will be easily adaptable for their sectors. And so I think in addition to doing the research and identifying these processes, as we think more towards the implementation and the scaling of this work, there also needs to be a great level of consideration and collaboration and cooperation with the professionals in these fields, both from the kind of like artists, creators, but also the professionals working in the museum. When you go to the museum, the things don't magically appear on display. They're curated, they're presented in a particular way, and if we can understand how that is created from the professional's perspective, we can identify points for intervention that are going to be sustainable for these institutions and might create a greater change and greater adaptation and implementation within these fields. And so I think kind of in closing, in addition to this collaboration, it's also important for us to understand from the research perspective what are the needs and the kind of points of emphasis within the cultural sector, to understand what are the target outcomes that they are most interested in addressing, because in my kind of discussions with arts and cultural professionals, they're deeply interested in the concept of well-being from their institutions and from their kind of disciplines, but don't necessarily know how to tweak what they're doing in a meaningful way that's going to get at the outcomes that they're most interested in. And so with these dialogues and with these types of meetings, we can start understanding those perspectives so that we can bring our individual expertise to their arena, and they can bring their expertise to help us kind of develop and co-create these resources. So keep it brief, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Katherine. Any questions? Yeah, Doris.
happy to be among the survivors. You know, los duros, as we say in Spanish, were, you know, dedicated. And I love the way you posed our challenges. So I want to, you know, continue the conversation. I think that one simple and kind of unarticulated concept that we're all feeling that may be useful is to say that the artist is not a victim. To the degree that we're making something new, not just decorating, we're making decisions. So whatever limitations we have in our lives, economic, health, whatever, it's a way to get out of depression because we know we're making decisions. So that may be a useful bridge. It's, I heard myself saying that in Nairobi when we were working with John and Tom and a distinguished psychiatrist, because I said, art is therapy, it's not as therapy. And why is art therapy? Because when you make art, you know that there's someone there, active, as an agent. So I just wanted to offer that, see what you think, but it's one of the slogans that I warned Annalisa I would say. But thank you for setting up you know, a new level of conversation for us.
No, and I definitely agree that agency and the like autonomy that you derive from the creation of art is incredibly important. We had a presentation earlier today that was talking about the role of kind of identity and agency as a component of self-identity and being particularly salient. And so I think that can be like a mechanistic property that we can really examine of how best can we optimize people feeling that sense of autonomy and agency through arts engagement to then lead to, I mean, it's a good outcome in its own right, certainly, but then to lead to the things of reductions in depression and increases in flourishing. So I think you're very much right on point, as always.
Any other questions? Okay, so as clever chairman say, last but not least, Gangemi, your floor.
Hello. Apparently I missed the most fun since I arrived just a couple of hours ago, but okay, I'll try to put there some points. I'm here as director of the Institute for Cognitive Sciences and Technologies of the Italian National Research Council. It's a special institute because started in the 70s of last century with the explicit purpose of joining up natural and artificial intelligence. It was just at the beginning at the time. And actually, we continue doing that and still do. And especially, I will talk about what we are doing in 2 or 3 different projects, trying to get some possible lessons learned for what we could do for art today. So one of them is a very large project. Actually, it just started, but might be quite interesting because Italy invested more than 100 million euros on AI, on foundations of AI, actually, not just on AI. And this will be called the FAIR project. And a part of it is about human-centered artificial intelligence. And there is a part on creativity as well that is going to be done by my institute as well as by University of Bologna, which I belong to as well. Anyway, given that, my point is starts from a fragment by Wittgenstein. It's the 531. Is we understand the sentence from the fact that it could be substituted by another one, but also because it cannot be substituted. This is a kind of fundamental. At the time when I studied many years ago, actually, I didn't realize the fullness of this sentence in the fact that it represents very well what is the dynamics today between AI and our human intelligence, let's say, which is actually a continuum. Okay, so we understood that very soon. In the fact that we recognize patterns, there is a sort of patternicity in what we recognize, and then we try to encode it so that it could be reused. But also we recognize that there is something which is unique every time we do something. And art typically tries to eternalize this unicity in many cases, sometimes not, sometimes it just does the opposite just because even that one is a form of uniqueness, of course. But then from what happens with training AI, for example, doing things even on the in the artistic side, and we have seen a lot nowadays, no? From Midjourney to DALL-E to the results of ChatGPT, and everything changed in a few months. It's just because natural language is very easy to interact with. So suddenly the killer app of AI appeared from nowhere. and everyone, we had an interesting seminar of 2 days this week in Bologna, just discussing about these things. By the way, what I would bring here is the fact that what is not totally clear yet, especially when we make discussions about AI and creativity, is the fact that creativity is not well defined, okay? Just because it's an open textured, concepts are lawyers and legal computer scientists would say. But for sure, there are some things that are clearly necessary and that are not really there in terms of the foundations of AI. One of them is perspectivality. Sometimes it has been mentioned somehow, especially in something that relates also to, and also low probability of what happens typically, and the fact that there are multiple perspectives that operate and interact so that we create something, and also the fact that errors produce creativity. And this is something that in AI typically is minimized. Okay, you try to make people agree on something. You try to measure p-values so that even in experiments, even in cognitive science, you want to make experiments that try not to start from a gold standard or provide a threshold, while sometimes disagreement is actually pretty important. It's even more important than what we. So how to inject that? No? Now imagine mistakes like, there is a famous example. I like jazz and they play the saxophone, that's why I mentioned it. But Miles Davis was famous for circumventing each error in the background and making it creative. This was incredible. Herbie Hancock has a very nice interview on that. About his history. He was waiting for some stick launched at his head, but actually it was instead something, a real good moment. So how to make art, when it makes a unique locality, value this thing, okay? How to value that? How to make it back into the practice of everyday life? This is something that really makes a difference, no? Because then people can really understand what is happening. For example, can look at what an artist is doing, in whatever form it is, and try possibly to imitate it or to understand that there is a continuum between regular life and artistic life, which is not necessarily a total exception, although it thrives for that. So this is my first lesson learned that is okay from 500 miles high. Sorry for not going into a lot of details. Also, I had a lot of slides, but I understood that this is more like a panel than I just took some minutes. And another point is on the societal side that maybe the institutions here and us as a movement and the EIT, etc., might help, is how to help, I would say, people in general, but in particular artists, to be recognized their rights when you start training AIs, okay? This is a major point, but initially wasn't considered at all. So there were many things, but imagine, ChatGPT is based on a model that was trained originally, it was pretty bad. So at a certain point they introduced a very new kind of reinforcement learning, and this actually changed the game, and now we have this thing. But then there is human knowledge. So how does it work so well? No? But it's very simple. It's semiotics. Umberto Eco would tell you. Unfortunately, it's not there. But because, once you start training on massive amounts of language, somehow this language acquires a sort of, the model that you train acquires a sort of iconicity that is not typical of fragments of language, but only when you reach a certain amount. No? So you have actually a sort of singularity that appears there. We are discussing and working on that. Stefano Nolfi, for example, who was one of those that say, but without embodiment, without enactment, without the ease that you want, you can't really have meaning. But actually, some emergence of that, but not, of course, not everything. No, physical meaning is still sometimes strange. But I think that this might be based on the nature of what this AI does. It's important to regain some value of what, as humans, we have produced, and use it on our own, actually, on our turn, as a, I would say, sorry for that, as a slave. It's actually, robots were intended to be slaves. Come on, let's have the courage to say that they have no particular rights until they will become so ethical and so refined and like data in Star Trek that we start recognizing some real agency, okay? But let's not exaggerate with this fairness even with them. So, for example, we started making some experiments and using these AIs to produce something creative because we were controlling what they did. So eliminating hallucinations or minimizing them or trying to force them providing something that is useful to us. And that worked. It's actually working. Also, some people know coming from people that do doubling, for example, with movies. In Italy, there is quite a market for that. In other places, it's not like that. No? They are afraid that now they will be substituted. And they say, use it instead of fearing it. No? That's the. Then I had another point about the United Nations goals, the sustainable goals. I liked a lot that thing. But one thing that emerged when I was discussing with the University of Bologna about how to associate these goals directly to papers produced by researchers at the university. And of course, the vast majority wasn't about, how can I study some esoteric measurement of, I don't know, some the Kripken structures and so that. So it's clearly what do I associate there? No? The point is that there is a chain of value in science that is, by the way, connected to the chain of value in society in general and in art as well. And actually, all these chain of values should be also recognized. And for example, making knowledge explicit about art is something that we do in multiple projects that I won't mention because otherwise we go directly to dinner later. And but so what happens with that is that how to make this chain of value recognized is that you should be able to look at what happened in the past and see, for example, that the theory of numbers in 19th and 18th century in mathematics eventually now has become incredibly valuable because you then can encrypt all the messages on the web. But until that point, it was totally considered just a divertissement for the mathematicians. So how to recognize these chains of values and then make sense also in terms of, and this also is for art, no? How much Einstein was influenced by art and eventually his work was influenced by, so all these kinds of analogies or metaphors in science, for example, no? Metaphor was considered, usually, mostly it is still now, just a linguistic game. Actually it isn't, no? We discovered by using AI that metaphors actually create new material, new conceptualizations, and possibly then new behavior by means of by the people. And this is very important because then it's used also for the evil, for making disinformation, for creating new narratives that don't work. So we should be aware of that, no? And making it restitute to that the value and the ability for people to be recognized and possibly also to add some tag when you are a professor of some esoteric thing. So yeah, in general, I would stop there. So my recommendations, given what we are doing in this panel, is that. I recommend again, once more, use technology, just not, it's important to criticize it, but also to to exploit it. For example, we discovered that virtual reality enhances empathy. It's something that is going to be published in very soon, and this was totally unexpected. So what we did, essentially, we produced within the SPICE project, which is an H2020 project about social inclusion by means of cultural heritage, by the way. That's why I still mentioned that. And we did, okay, the people enter into this virtual museum and start providing interpretations. Then they start having reflections, interpretations made by others that we have directly taken from the, and then at that point, these others communicate by means of an avatar within a virtual reality environment. Okay. Then they become that avatar. Suddenly, they see themselves in the mirror as the other person. So this idea was, let's imagine, maybe they will change more easily their mind. We discovered that there is actually quite an improvement of their ability. Huh? That's why we called it virtual empathy. And this was measured by electrophysiological signals, or with a cognitive scientist actually that is a specialist in virtual reality. So yeah, this is one example. Another example is the symbolic values that we have in the multiple cultures. Okay, one of my PhD students, I asked him, why don't you just try to represent formally, with these knowledge graphs that we do, all this symbolic material, from China, from Western countries, from Africa, etc. And after a long work, actually, it was much more difficult to represent us than expected. He created this huge knowledge graph with all this stuff, which is, by the way, available on GitHub for those that want to use it in for their research. And then he created, for example, I don't have the slide, I have it, but I can't project it here. You can then look at the similarities based on the objects of the world that are used as symbols and what they represent within different cultures. And you discover this heat map with the correlations between cultures that could be used, for example, to inject more potential inclusive material in a virtual reality, or even directly in something that you live as your own experience. Other examples of that, you can have this sort of value chain enhanced by talking jointly about facts that happen, their symbolic values, the emotions and values that are understood, automatically detected by an algorithm, and then reason jointly about this stuff. This is closer to what we do in real life. So, for example, another paper that we have now on scientific reports by Nature is about the fact that the famous Ekman's theory of emotions actually is not very useful when you go to real life situations. So there is a very nice work done some time ago, which is a work of art, by the way, in itself, which is called the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. Anyone knows about that? It's a very nice thing. It's actually this guy that imagined hundreds of emotions that in the real context. For example, when you sit in the back of a car while your friends are talking about everything and nothing, and you are relaxed, but also you dream about something. And he said, okay, I will provide names for that, just because emotions do not exist in the. And then we said, okay, why don't we experiment on that and see if people can really tag things in a way that is compliant with Ekman. We discovered actually that Ekman's emotions don't work in many, even if you describe even situations that were annotated in a very controlled way with Ekman's emotions, we tried to reproduce it by also describing them as real life situations, and subjects didn't agree, and even Ekman's emotions were used mainly by alexithymic people, so those that are hard at having emotions. So it looks more like these are pretty interesting results. No, once you start doing empirical things, so studying the real happenings, and then you may take into create discussions about what we do in humanities as well, and make these a very interesting science, which is not just borrowing methods from physics or biology, but to do it with methods could be formal, reproducible, or understandable in ways, but introducing then also new paradigms. Okay, sorry, I went long because I like this, but okay, I will stop here. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. Even in this, okay, one question over there. Can we have a mic? Yeah, good diaphragm.
Mostly because I study sense of self, sense of identity and agency, and I think that there is evidence that the interaction with the devices and with the artificial intelligence may hinder the sense of identity and the sense of agency of individuals. But I wanted to comment also on something else. I don't know if this is becoming a question or not, I don't know. Right. But there is something that is seldom discussed in the artificial intelligence discussions, and it's about the the general aim of the high-level AIs, like ChatGPT, for example. The aim of ChatGPT or other softwares is to trick humans into believing that they are really like humans. So this is using really special software, really high-level software, really high potential software, to do something that it's basically useless, which is to trick. It becomes just like magic, and the computer becomes a magician, and he must trick you. And we are happy if the computer tricks us. We are happy when we are tricked by the artificial intelligence, and not when we are helped by the artificial intelligence, which is something that happens with scientists when we use machine learning stuff and so on. So maybe I was thinking that this is because we are installing ourselves into the machines, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it's us, it's humans, that they are naturally born deceivers and trickers, and we are transforming machines into something that is similar to us, that is humans, so deceiver machines, just like us. I don't know if you have some comments on that, on the direction that is taking the AI field and high-level AI softwares like ChatGPT and so on.
Yeah, okay, in principle many, and maybe we don't have the time to discuss about all that. But in general, I would say, of course, tricking people is very old. Go back to the Mechanical Turk, when there was the guy hidden into the box and playing chess. This was received by... So there is a cheat box level for all AIs, including this one, of course. But on the other hand, I might say, so why washing machine wasn't a trick as well? So imitated something which has a function. So the point is, the moment you start considering these AIs just as tools that can be used, and you understand what you're doing, it's not just, oh, look what this cute cat could do. No, it's then at that point probably this kind of cheating paradigm becomes something else. Okay, you know in advance that of course it's not a human. No? There is a difference between I don't remember where I got this, but it's pretty intuitive, between performance and competence. Okay, so what these new AIs do, they have improved massively their performance, but it doesn't imply that they are competent at what they are doing. They mean, it's like when you talk, it's that's why someone called it a stochastic monkey. So, by the way, the monkey is also pretty good, but the stochastic parrot was actually the good Gary Marcus thought that. And because it's, assuming that the parrot actually just repeats things that doesn't really provide any meaning in any form, they just repeat. They are very super able to, super good at predicting what would be the next to happen given a prompt. So when you give a prompt, the human typically creates quite a mental model and organizes things in a certain way. When you provide the prompt to them, in a sense, they create a mental model, but this mental model is just a tensor that maps to the huge tensor of things that have been trained upon in the past with weighting provided by reinforcement learning, etc., which is not how the brain works. Okay? There is some similarity here and there, but it's not really what we do. And also, what they say are not based on real experience. If you look at science fiction movies like Her or things like that, there you really feel because it's represented in a way which is very, very vivid. So, by the way, of course it is a trick, but could be a trick that is useful to many, provided it does not affect badly, for example, artists or people in general, or people tend to believe too much. You know about the lawyer it was in Australia, maybe. This guy is incredible. So he looked some precedents on Earth for a very minor thing. It was not very important. But then since he didn't find any precedent that for supporting the view of his client, then he asked ChatGPT. Even asked ChatGPT if you really knew about those things, and she said, oh, of course I know, this is, and then he provided it to the judge, but they didn't exist at all. No? It was, because he was very good at producing, at inventing something. No? And what happened then is that this guy probably will go to prison because it was trying to cheat the court, which is not something really minor, no? Besides the fact it's very stupid. No? Like Carlo Cipolla would be enthusiastic about that, actually. Okay.
Okay, very well. Any other question? Oh, yeah.
This is also perhaps a question, but I'll try to make it as a question. I work a lot with like illustrators of like games, okay, mostly board games. And as you can imagine, they've been freaking out the whole year because there are actually already jobs getting lost. And I can tell you, I've been doing some really small art direction programs for like gamings, and I must tell you, it helps a lot. And saving a lot of money. There's one level where probably we cannot solve this problem. Although I would like to point at one issue, and I'd like to know what you think about this. And it's at the policy level. Isn't it that from now on we are wasting way more energies when we are watching an illustrations on our cell phone, especially when it comes to this sort of really figurative kind of artistic models like fantasy art, okay? Like Midjourney went straight to fantasy art. Like the top guy who is being notched out by Midjourney is a guy who does Magic the Gathering illustrations, the trading card game. It's Greg Rutkowski, and he's been like, they've been talking a lot about this. I'm wondering, in terms of like collective psychology and our collective consciousness, we've been talking a lot about that today. Isn't it that we'll be wasting way more energies if there isn't some sort of watermark signaling me in a very smart way that has been produced not by a human?
Yeah, I guess it is a good idea. People have told that. They should watermark things. Yeah, indeed. Any kind of watermarking also in a metaphoric sense. So somehow you should be able... There are systems that try to detect AI art. But frankly, from what they told me, they don't work very well. No. They tried also, because it's enough that you change just a little bit. And it was famous with adversarial learning, no? That you put two pictures that are exactly the same for a human, but then it's a face of a cat. And then in the second face of the cat, you change a little bit, some part of the green in his on his face, and then suddenly it says, oh, it's a bunch of guacamole. Actually, it's not. But these examples were made intentionally just to try to cheat the machine and try to improve it, actually. No? Anyway, at a certain point, probably, there will be... So there is always a trade-off. No? The more you learn how to not be discovered, the more you try to inject elements that can help you discover something. So it will be a cat and chase a mouse. Cat and chase mouse. The mouse chase. Sorry, it's late. Syntactic combination. No,
you choose the order. Okay, another question? I don't think so. It's time to wrap it up. So, final remarks by Pierluigi and Riccardo. I don't know which is the order.
Okay.
So also on behalf of Riccardo, I will make a few conclusions, but I will really keep it short. Just only one brief, summarizing this today's incredible, by the way, days. And first of all, I'm so deeply grateful to everybody who's contributing to this for me, really kind of watershed event. I'm really deeply grateful. And as I said, summarizing this is basically hopeless. So I don't even attempt. But at the same time, there is one brief consideration that comes to mind. As an economist, trained as an economist as I was accustomed to think, because that was basically the way of reasoning of economists, that you should keep it simple. So if you are, for example, describing human nature, trying to describe what are the motivations behind choices and so on, keep it simple. I mean, maybe that's not realistic, but in the end, you know, if this really captures what we observe, it's all right. Okay. And basically, this is probably the reason why economics has been able to inform, just much beyond the discipline itself, a kind of thinking that basically humans are information processors. It's basically what they are. You just input information, and you of course, produce behavior as a consequence of this. Yeah, you should keep it simple, but not that simple. I think that one thing that emerged very clearly is that that metaphor has been one of the most dangerous metaphors that has really plagued our own, you know, dealing with basically all aspects of human existence. What we are, I mean, this is a big lesson that arrives, of course, for so many different disciplinary angles, but this has been restated so powerfully in these 2 days. But really, the role of imagination, dreams, fears, the sensitivity to symbols and aesthetic codes, it's not just something that is, let's say, a superstructure that should we abstract from. That's basically the thing. That's basically it. So the point is really, how could we, I mean, how could we arrive to misimagine at such a deep level what humans are and how they function? You know, I think that this is really the point. It's a point of some sense of reckoning for the future. And this has to do also in terms of with the implication of what we want to do on this point. We have seen, for example, that clearly from an information processing point of view, and this is basically what has been probably the most ambitious product of this economizing way of thinking, like, for example, in the case of architecture of choice and nudging. So very much about give people information and people will act accordingly. Well, I think that the tragic natural experiment of the pandemic told us very clearly that it's not enough giving people information. I keep on hearing people which are extremely well educated that are completely confused about the counterfactual implications of vaccination. So, I mean, you can give them all the information you want, but this doesn't change their way of reasoning and framing this. With some colleagues, we even made a computational social science analysis through Twitter of the flows of information and authority that were created around the pandemic conversations. And we basically found that the social organization of conversations was entirely founded around a hierarchy of influencers, most of which were disinformation agents. The impact of scientists in this conversation was basically less of the most common trolls. Literally, trolls were more influential than the most authoritative scientists. So the point then is, okay, so of course we process information, but if we don't really understand, I mean, what is the role of symbols, aesthetic, and imagination in framing our own way of reasoning and our own way of, let's say, shaping our own behavioral responses, probably we are simply completely missing the point. So in a sense, what I think emerged also, I mean, it's one of the many possible bottom lines, but the one bottom line that emerged, I think, very clearly from these 2 days is that probably it's time to think of a different way of thinking about behaviors, thinking about the very, very, very long run, which means the deep biological design that is related to our capacity to react of symbols, imaginations, and aesthetics. And from this point of view, I will simply make an example. I mean, a personal one. Okay, so of course, we are speaking of humans, but sometimes you also have to remind yourself that you are one of those. So, for example, I have heard so many times all this information about, okay, of course, you know, global warming and so on, and so forth. So you should, for example, reduce the time that you take, that you use taking a shower. because especially if the water is hot, I mean, you're wasting resources and so on and so forth. I heard that countless times, and as a scientist, of course, I also had clear evidence that this is the case. Did this ever motivate me to take a shorter shower? Honestly, never. I never, ever, taking the shower, thought of this 1 second. Then I went to a hotel, an interesting student hotel, in which I found something very interesting. Basically on the water pipe, there was an interactive device that literally showed a white bear just sitting on an iceberg, and literally this iceberg was melting. The more so, the more I was taking the shower. Well, I had to finish that damn shower. I mean, because I couldn't stand the idea that this poor white bear would literally drown. You know, this is a very simple example, but I think it captures the essence. And the essence is this. I mean, we have an incredible opportunity to start thinking of cultural interventions as an alternative paradigm to behavioral change. And this is not only a way of literally, in some sense, redefining the role that culture has in our own understanding of human behavior, but it's also a way, in some sense, of rehumanizing policy. Because one thing that we tend to forget is that when we are treated as information processors, we are bored and frustrated. Whereas, when we are faced with stimuli that really tap into our own playfulness and imagination, we are engaged. So in some sense, we know that grammar so well that it's not an effort. It's really a problem of just getting engaged. So from this point of view, I think that we have a wonderful research and policy agenda ahead. And the fact that, of course, in this conversation, there have been not only scientists, but also policymakers and the most important institutions today that are responsible for shaping future policies, I think is very encouraging. One last note in this regard. As correctly pointed out by Giorgio Fazio, I mean, we need to involve, of course, also the policymakers that do the nitty-gritty work of policy design at the territorial level. But from this point of view, the kick is actually giving us an incredibly interesting opportunity, because as it was quickly mentioned by Ben Faisal today, we are launching this new, and also by the way, by Alessandra Marasco, we are launching this new initiative called the Policy Club, which is a peer learning community of policymakers that will basically work as a collective intelligence to start imagining a new approach to, let's say, problem solving, to literally peer learning and co-creation, facing specific societal challenges. So for example, we will have a call for the Policy Club in the fall, in which I cannot, of course, disclose on what specific topic, but on a topic that is very much related to a very specific and typical problem in terms of societal challenges, where, in this case, the policymakers are invited to devise together and to launch, for example, at their local administration level, projects that address that specific topic on which we can also have a performance measurement. This thing, I think, is very encouraging. And by the way, we are going to present this 2 days from now in Berlin at the Festival of Creative Bureaucracy. That in itself, I think, is a very nice way to put it in terms of what we need to do in the future to in some sense, to change the narrative from this point of view. So I think that, I mean, it's been energizing, but also exhausting, but I think that we have a pretty interesting and reasonable future agenda work. Before we finish, I think that, however, it's important to realize that all this would not be possible without this wonderful group of PhD students that really worked day and night for months. Huh? Come on stage. So, come out. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, we are just not. Well, some of them are missing, but we will at least, I mean, for those who are here now. No, we are really proud of them because, of course, by the way, this has been a conference which they would have probably enjoyed much more just sitting there and listening to it. Fortunately, it's recorded, so we will go through it. But of course, I mean, it's been for them a big responsibility, sometimes even a bit frustrating. Is really literally like being a banquet and not being able to sit at a banquet. But at the same time, we think that these are also the experiences that can really, I mean, show how much we can do if we work together in this regard. And honestly, I still remember that when I was just a graduate at the University of Bologna, there was the celebration for the 9th century of the university, and we had a huge conference with top economists from all over the world. And honestly, for me, for example, that experience defined so much what I wanted to do in the future, that sometimes, you know, this kind of experiences, I think, can be also very, very useful in this regard. So thank you so much for all your contribution. And at this point, the best is yet to come. Thank you so much.